Okay, welcome everyone to this webinar on studying in the United States. We are organizing this webinar specifically for teachers and school counselors in the Netherlands today. And our aim is to provide you with some good resources as you work with students who are applying to colleges and universities in the US. So thank you for joining us today. I would like to start by introducing today's speakers. So my name is Manon Kolsteren. I'm the EducationUSA advisor here in the Netherlands. I'm based at the Fulbright Commission. I've been working at the Fulbright Commission for almost 10 years now. And I myself have a background in American studies, and I've also spent some time studying in the US as an exchange student in South Carolina. And I'm very happy to be joined today by our two guest speakers from the University of Arizona and Educational Credential Evaluators, or ECE. And so Pauline is the enrollment counselor for Europe at the University of Arizona. University of Arizona is a mid-sized public land-grant university in the southwest of the US. They're based in Tucson, Arizona. And they have about 13% of their student populations are international students. They also have scholarships for international students that go up to 50% of tuition. And Pauline actually started at the university as an international student herself. She worked in the admissions office as a student worker during her undergraduate degree, and she's now been with the University of Arizona for more than 2 years as an admissions officer for different territories. So she's worked with Europe, Central Asia, Russia, and South Asia, and reviewed applications from all over the world. So thank you for joining us. And we are also joined by Timothy, who is a senior evaluator at ECE. And he's also based in the US, joining us from Wisconsin today. ECE is a nonprofit organization that prepares foreign education credential evaluation reports. And they do this for colleges and universities, but also employers, governments, others. So Timothy has worked at ECE for over 20 years now, in different capacities as an evaluator, manager, and senior evaluator. And he's also actively involved in training and coaching new evaluators. He's also presented on a wide range of credential evaluation topics at different conferences, both regional, national, and international. And he conducts customized training programs with international admissions officers at universities in the United States and Canada. So thank you both for getting up so early and joining us today for this webinar to share your insights with us. But before we go a bit deeper into the application process and how everything works, I wanted to start with a quick introductory overview. EducationUSA is a Department of State network with more than 400 advising centers in more than 175 countries across the world. Our center offers free advice to anyone with questions about studying in the United States. So for students and parents, but also for you as school counselors and teachers. We offer a lot of resources to help students navigate the admissions process. We have information on our website that kind of explains the admissions process. We organize webinars like these, also for students. And we also organize events with American universities, such as our annual college fair, which happened last week. So the EducationUSA Center in the Netherlands is hosted at the Fulbright Commission, which is a nonprofit organization. It's funded by both the Dutch and American government, and the Fulbright Commission also offers scholarships for Dutch and American students, although most scholarships are at the master's level. We do also have some scholarships for gap year students. And then there are some differences between the Dutch and American education system that are good for you to be aware of. And you might already know of these differences, but I always think it's helpful to start with this overview just to get everyone on the same page. So one important difference is that the American educational system does not distinguish between what we call habo and wo degrees. So there are no 3-year bachelor's degrees. Every student has to complete 4 years of studies to complete their bachelor's degrees. And that also means that students can enroll at an American university with both a havo and VWO diploma. This is a different situation from the Netherlands. And of course, so some universities will be more selective than others. There might be a few very selective universities that will require a VWO diploma, but most universities admit students with a havo and VWO diploma. However, the application procedure is a bit more complicated in the US. So in the Netherlands, we have a relatively simple application procedure. Of course, there are some exceptions for medical studies and maybe numerous fixed studies, which require a bit more work. But generally speaking, the application process is quite straightforward. In the US, there's a much more elaborate application procedure, which Pauline and Timothy will explain to you in just a few minutes. And it's also good to be aware that the deadlines are much earlier in the US. Deadlines will differ per university, but they can range from between the 1st of November for early applications and the 1st of January or later in spring for the regular applications. And in most cases, students will need to commit to a university before the 1st of May. So it's important that they've completed the application process and have been admitted to these universities well before the decision deadline. So if you're working with Dutch students interested in studying in the US, it's important to let them know to start their orientation process early. And we recommend starting about 1.5 years to 1 year before the intended start date. There are some other differences that are good to be aware of. The American curriculum is different as well from that in the Netherlands. So in the US, students don't apply for a specific field of study in their first year. So instead, they complete 2 years of general education and then specialize in the 3rd year. Of course, there are always some exceptions. There might be technical schools or art schools where students specialize early, but in general, studies in the US starts much broader, where students take all classes from different fields. This is also nice for students who don't really know what they want to study yet, because they have some time to kind of explore different fields and find out where their interests are. Last difference, of course, is the cost. Studying in the US is more costly than the Netherlands. So students can also look for scholarships to cover some of these costs. And this is also something they need to research well in advance. Most scholarships at the bachelor's level will be provided by the universities themselves. So students need to start researching scholarship opportunities before they start applying to universities. So all in all, applying to an American university, it's a much more time-consuming process. It requires a lot of research on the student's part, but also a lot of help from you as school counselors and teachers in guiding students and helping them submit the documents that are needed. So here are some resources that might be of help as you work with students in the Netherlands. First, we have a general advising page that kind of explains the application process in 5 steps. We also have a lot of information on funding and scholarships. Although again, like I said, most scholarships will come from the universities themselves, but students can also bring studiefinanciering abroad to the US, like students' loans and their monthly stipends. You can also see a couple of useful scholarship databases on the slide. And of course, if your students or you have any questions about the application process, you can always reach out to us via email. And we're always happy to help and explain the process to you. So I would now like to invite Pauline to tell us a bit more about the application process at American universities. Now,
thank you so much.
Sharing.
Give me yes. Okay. Give me 1 second. I share my screen with you all. All right. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. My name is Pauline. I use she, her pronouns. I am an admissions counselor at the University of Arizona. So what that means is that I help international students apply to the U of A, and I read the application and I basically decide if the University of Arizona or, if the University of Arizona is a good fit for them, and any other admissions counselor at any other university will do the same thing. So I'm just here to tell you a little bit about how it works, right? Like, what does it look like from my end? I've kept it quite broad. So this will apply to almost any university that your student chooses to apply to. It doesn't have to be the University of Arizona. Obviously, I would love to see students apply here, but I've kept it as broad as I can just to give you a good overview of what your role is as a counselor when you help a student apply. So a little bit first, I do want to talk a little bit about the University of Arizona. So we were founded in 1885. So we are one of the oldest universities in the state of Arizona. We are a public land-grant university. What that means is that we are the official university for the state of Arizona. That means that there's lots of funding available, lots of scholarships, lots of resources for students. I've already kind of talked about this, but we have about 13% international students at the U of A. So that's at the undergraduate level, the graduate level, and above. And we are very proud. We almost have a 46%. We have a 46% diverse student body. What that means is that students identify as non-white. And then we are very close to the border with Mexico. So we are a Hispanic serving institution as well. Even though this looks like a huge number, 51,000 students, this actually still qualifies as a mid-sized university in America. But it's a beautiful big campus. You will see some pictures throughout the presentation. You can also see behind me. But yeah, all right. So this applies to the University of Arizona, but also in general. So we've already talked about that students who are interested in studying in the state should probably start their application as early as possible. It's never too early to apply, right? So for the University of Arizona and for most other universities that use the early action deadline system, the application deadline will be November 1st. So at this point, we still have a little bit of time. So if you do have any students that are interested, they should probably get started, start working on the application right now. And then students will have to commit about 5 months before the semester starts. That gives them plenty of time to apply for their visas and get their funding and all that kind of stuff. All right. The regular decision deadline is a little bit later in the year, so in the early spring, and that just gives students a little bit more time to apply if they aren't sure that they want to go to a specific university yet. There's 2 ways that you can apply to universities. One is through the Common App, and it's basically one big website where you can apply to most universities. And instead of filling out a separate application for every university, you fill out one, and then it gets sent to the universities that the student picks. Or some universities have their own application portals as well. But as a counselor, you'll probably primarily be working in the Common App anyway. So that is kind of like where you can make your own little profile, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Ooh. Let's see. Is that it? Yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the application requirements. What does a student need to apply to US universities? So I have split it up here for you guys. So for the University of Arizona, you need your, what I'm about to tell you is that every single student probably needs this, and then I'm going to talk about what other schools might need that the University of Arizona does not require. I'm so sorry. It's very early in the morning for me, so my brain is still warming up. Okay, so for most universities, you will have to submit an online application. So that is just for us to kind of gauge who the student is, how many years of education have they done, what education did their parents do, all of that kind of stuff, all right? So students will need to fill out an application essay, 1 or 2, it depends on the school, but it's basically going to be very broad questions like, why is this specific university the best fit for you? So that will be something that the student will have to think about. I normally recommend students work on this for about a week, and then they submit, and then they don't worry about it anymore. Most schools will need at least 3 years of high school transcripts. So what that means is that we need to see the grades for the last 3 years of completed study. That will give us a good indication of how the student is doing academically, and that obviously varies from school to school, but for the University of Arizona, we need 3 years. And then we do need proof of English proficiency. So there is tons of English proficiency tests that students can do. I normally recommend that students do the Duolingo English test. It's the most affordable, it's the least stressful, and they can do it online. So that is really, really nice. For some other English proficiency exams, you will have to travel to like a testing center, and sometimes students can find that very, very stressful. It's a very high stress situation and a lot more money. Other schools may need from the students to take a standardized test. So that can be the ACT or the SAT, and that is a test that most American students will do when they graduate high school, and it basically tests them in a bunch of different areas. Some schools might need that, some schools don't, but again, this comes at an extra cost, and the student will have to travel to a testing center to do that. They also might need a statement of purpose, so why the specific university and what do they want to achieve while they're at the university. So it's again another essay that the student should think about and plan ahead. And then for majors like arts or architecture or music or dance, you might need to put together some sort of portfolio. They might need to do some kind of audition. That really depends. As a counselor, they might need from you a letter of recommendation, and I will talk to you about that in a future slide, but that is your guys' job as a counselor to provide the letter of recommendation. As well as that, what you should prepare is that you can give the student the transcripts they need. So again, the last 3 years or the last 2 years or however many years the school needs of completed grades, okay? So sometimes the student will need to have them translated. Maybe you can translate it for them. It really depends. The student can probably upload it themselves, or they might need you to upload it for them. And that just means that you can upload it into the Common App, or you can email it to the counselor, whatever you need. You also will need to send the transcripts officially at some point. We will talk about that in a later slide, how to do that. And then you might need to prepare your school profile, which we will talk about. So this is just a general overview. Again, applications to US universities are a little bit of a headache, and they can be very, very time consuming. But yeah. All right, so transcripts. So transcripts, again, are just the end of year grades that the student has received. I have some examples on the next slide so you can see what it looks like. So the unofficial transcripts are used when we evaluate applications. So this the student can send us themselves. I get emails from phone pictures, from screenshots, from whatever they have, and that's what we will use to make the admissions decision. All right. So again, they should be very legible, but the student can most of the time send these unofficial transcripts to us themselves. All right. Sending official transcripts, now this may differ from school to school. It really depends. What the University of Arizona needs is that you as a counselor email us the same transcript that the student has sent to me or to another email address directly, okay? It is really important that the student is not included on this email. So this should come directly from you as a counselor to me as an admissions counselor. Because as soon as the student is included on the email, we can't count it as official anymore. And then obviously, whatever you do, if you email a transcript, make sure that you have the student's identifying information. The amount of time I get emails with just the transcript attached, and I have no idea who this transcript is for, I couldn't even count on. It's a very, very big number. But yeah, so that is kind of like how it works at the U of A. So you as a counselor need to email us the transcript. Now, sometimes you will be able to upload them into the Common App yourself, and they will count as official, but it differs from school to school, and the school will definitely let you know how to send official transcripts. But you might have to do a little bit of work on your end to email us the transcript. So this is 2 transcripts that we've received in the past from the Netherlands. So here you can see this is what we have received from the counselor. So you can see here on the left-hand side in your guys' language, then we have it translated into English, and then we have a grading scale. So that will give me as an admissions counselor a good indication, how good are the grades and how are they evaluated. It differs from country to country, but this is kind of like what you should be sending us. This is one of the transcripts I was talking about. And here you can see we have 4 years instead of 3 years, which is excellent, and that's what we need. So this is kind of like what you should send to us, or what the students should send to us. All right, recommendation letters. Now, this is where you as a counselor talk about the student and how amazing the student is. America is self-obsessed. So this is not something that we from Europe are used to, right? But you really have to boast about the student. You have to make them stand out. You have to tell us how amazing the student is, and sometimes that's a little bit difficult for people. But this is what kind of like is expected when the student applies to an American university. So feel free to just go crazy in your recommendation letter and let us know how amazing the student is and why they are the perfect student for us. So this is kind of like the overall theme that should be in your recommendation letter, how amazing the student is, all right? Then you do want to tell us a little bit about why the student is a good fit to study in the United States. Have they had previous international experience? And explain any circumstances that are not in the application. So we get recommendation letters from councils that explain to us that the student has struggled financially or has family struggles, and like that will give us a good background into what the student's application looks like. And then obviously you do want to talk about the student in terms of their academic background and how good they're doing. The letter should be no longer than a page. Feel free to, again, go crazy and boast about your student. That's the most important thing. And then you can send it you can upload it to the Common App, to your counselor profile, or you can send it to us. And it should be signed and on an official letterhead and all that kind of stuff. But that is what the recommendation letter looks like. Okay, the school profile, I do have an example that I'm going to show real quick, just so you know what it looks like. So the school profile gives us a good idea as an admissions counselor, what is the school? Okay, so this is just an example I found online. So it's not a real school profile. But you should include in the school profile, is it an urban environment? Is it a rural environment? Where is the school situated? You know, like in the city or the country that you're in. Economic environment, so are people better off, or maybe are they struggling financially? That will give us a good idea of what it looks like. We do want to know class size, grading scales, graduation rate, so how many students finish high school? Is it an English-speaking school? That's always really, really helpful. And then what are the opportunities that students are given outside of work? You should treat this as a big overview of your school, because what happens is that even though I have all of Europe and all of Central Asia, some schools have even bigger territories. So it gives us a really good idea of what the school looks like. And we obviously can't know every school in every country in the world. So this will give us a really good idea. Again, this is not we don't need this if you apply to the University of Arizona, but it is useful if your student is applying to any other universities around the country. All right, so this is again what the school looks like. So here you can see, you can see a little bit about what is included, but this is going to be kind of like what you're looking for. And again, you should keep this to around a page or two, but it doesn't need to be crazy. And it can just be a typed up Word document as well. It doesn't need to have these graphics and stuff. All right, so what happens during the application review? I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to speed through this. So once the application is completed, the student completes the application. My job is to tell the student if we are missing anything. So sometimes we are missing a third year of academic transcripts, sometimes we're missing English proficiency, all of that kind of stuff. All right, so this is the first step. We basically just make sure that the student's application is complete. Then we will go through the grade calculation. So what that means is we will take the grades that the student has received at your guys' school and translate them into the American GPA. All right, that will make it easier for us to compare the student to other applicants. And then that whole package will get sent to me, and I will look at the application, I will read the essay, and I will make a decision based on whether I think the student is a good fit for us and if they get accepted. And then what we do is we go through all the applicants and all the students we like, and we basically shape the class. So that basically just means that my personal opinion gets passed on to another team, and they basically make sure that we have an equal number of men and women and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of like how it works. And then the student will receive the admissions decision, and then that's when you are no longer involved. Or if you do have any questions, obviously you're always welcome to reach out. But this is kind of like how it works. And this will be similar to most universities. Oh, good. Let's see here, sorry. Okay. If you want, we can, I'll put a link to this in the chat, but if you want, you can always join our mailing list so you can get updates from the University of Arizona. And then this is all of my contact information. And I'm not sure how time is, but I will finish out here and I'll be available for questions at the end as well.
Thank you so much, Pauline. That was really, really helpful. Timothy, I'll hand it over to you.
Amanda, thank you. Let me get my screen shared here. Is that working for you guys? Can you see everything? Is my slide visible, Manon?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. So my name is Timothy, and I work. My job is similar to Pauline, but she works a lot more with students. And in my job, I really don't work too much directly with students. I work with students' documents. I work at a credential evaluation agency here in the United States, which is, well, I won't get ahead of myself, but I'm going to kind of talk about three things. Just kind of an overview of what I do, how the process works, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we look at Dutch secondary education. So starting off with just really what do I do? And at a very basic level, credential evaluation is just looking at education across two different educational systems and sort of trying to reconcile, Dutch education compared to education in the United States. And the company that I work for, we do that, not just the Netherlands, but really every country across the world, any type of education, going back as far as students that are quite old, that are looking for another late career, or maybe just to kind of see what their education is equivalent to. And really, just at a basic level, we're kind of answering some important questions. And for the purpose of sort of university admission, we're asking, does the student from the Netherlands have something, from back home that we think is equivalent to a high school diploma? A high school diploma being the type of credential you need to get into university here in the United States. And then maybe they have something a little bit more than a high school diploma. That second question that we're always asking is, beyond just having a high school diploma, should they get any type of advanced standing? Did they do something that's more than a high school diploma? Should they get some transfer credits? And then the third thing we're kind of always looking at is, what were their grades like? In the USA, everything is about your grade point average. It's a number. It's out of a scale of 4. So someone that gets perfect grades, they would say their grade point average is 4, all A's. Or if you get all B's, you'd have a grade average of 3. So we're kind of looking to take, Dutch education graded out of 10 and sort of convert it into a US, education to make it easily comparable. One student from the Netherlands to students from the United States. Maybe the most important thing that I'll say to kind of frame everything, and Pauline, you did a really good job talking about this, is that everything in the USA, everything is decentralized. So often when I present, I say a lot of, it depends. It's going to be different from school to school. And I think everything that Pauline said, I think was good. Yeah. But that's the University of Arizona. And that might be different than Arizona State, another large public school in Arizona, or different than the University of New Mexico. Everything is decentralized and schools can kind of do what they want. And I think sometimes that's one of the more frustrating things for people in your job, is that you're applying at one school and you do the 5 things that University of Arizona says, but your student's also studying maybe on the East Coast at University of South Carolina, and they have a different list of 5 things. Everything's decentralized. I know it can be frustrating, but I say don't get frustrated. Think of that as like job security. The weirder the U.S. education is, the more tricky things are. That's good for you. Kind of like for me, anytime education in a home country is kind of weird, that's job security for me. There's 3,500 different colleges, universities in the United States, and everything is different. It's different from school to school. There's no standard way. I think most schools do the job that I do, credential evaluation, the job that my company does. I think most schools, especially most large schools, University of Arizona has 50,000 students. It's Pauline's job to work just with students from Europe. And I think you said Southeast Asia as well. But that's a really large school with lots of staff, lots of trained staff. There's a lot of smaller schools that just can't do credential evaluation in-house. They don't know about Dutch education. They don't have the necessary resources. They don't have the staff expertise. Maybe they only have 10 or 15 total international students. And that's really the reason that I have a job. We sort of offer an outsourcing option or a second opinion for universities that can't do that credential evaluation in their own offices. We also do a lot of work with things that aren't schools. We do a lot of work with like licensing boards, pharmacists, dentists, doctors, who sometimes even have less resources to sort of understand education in other countries. But that's why credential evaluation agencies exist, is just not all schools can do in-house what we do. So the process, I feel like sometimes I talked about how everything's decentralized, how everything can be different from school to school. I know sometimes the process can kind of feel like that sign, don't turn left, don't turn right, don't go back, don't go forward, stop. So I'm hoping the things that Pauline have talked about, that I will talk about, will help make things just a little bit more clear. And maybe the thing to keep in mind is that students don't always need to get credential evaluations from an agency like mine. Again, often the university they're applying to will just do that in-house. But I'm talking now what happens if your student is told, hey, you need to work with an evaluation company, someone like ECE, to get an evaluation report, sort of that outside agency opinion. And the thing to keep in mind is that the entire process is driven by the university. Really, our company is trying to help the university. And so it's really their requirements. The university decides, hey, is this outside evaluation even required? Are we going to do it in-house, or are we going to get the help, ask your student to get an evaluation from an agency? And if that is, if the student does need to get a report, first question to ask is which agencies are accepted. There's probably maybe 20 or 30 different agencies in the United States, perhaps more, that do credential evaluations. There's a number, maybe 5 or 10 like large services, ECE being one of those, that are fully staffed, that have been around for, I think ECE, we just celebrated our 45-year anniversary. And there's also very small agencies, a single person doing what we do. But the most important thing is which agencies are accepted. And then the next question to ask, which report type is required. I'll show you guys in a little bit later just some of the different types of report that ECE prepares. Usually it's probably a question of, will that report include a list of like each course the student took? They took mathematics, they took geometry, they took physics, and then individual credits and grades for that credential. Or is it going to be a more basic report that just said, hey, that student did havo, and we think it's equivalent to this. We think they have a high school diploma. Again, everything's driven by the university that they're applying to. If you're helping your student choose an evaluation agency, there's a number of different things to consider. And I put these probably in order of importance, things to choose, most important things to consider. Again, make sure that if you're getting an evaluation report, that it's going to be accepted at the university the student's applying to. And I know this sometimes can be very difficult because, again, the US universities can choose, and everything's different. Everything's decentralized. You may have a student that applies to one university and they accept reports from ECE. That a student applies to a different university and they may not accept ECE reports. Your student may apply to the architecture department at a university and they accept ECE reports. Then they apply to the engineering department and that department may use a different service or may not do evaluation, require outside evaluations at all. Again, everything's decentralized. But make sure if you're getting a report, make sure it's accepted at the desired institution, maybe as many as possible. Look at the reputation of the agency. There's really good, large, historic agencies. There's people that just put up a website and are not careful, are not thorough. There's a group called NACES, N-A-C-E-S, and that's just sort of an accrediting agency, almost like an accrediting agency for evaluation agencies to make sure that they're reputable, certain standards to follow. Find out how long it's going to take. Once the agency gets all the documents they need, is it a day? Is it 5 days? Is it 5 weeks? How much does it cost? And that's going to vary from agency to agency. And then what are the documentation requirements? And that's going to vary considerably. Pauline talked about, the whole idea between official documents from the student, unofficial documents from the student, official documents from the school. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So first of all, check the university requirements carefully. If I put something in red on a slide, that means it's going to be on the test. That's important. Start with what the university wants. Once you pick an agency, next most important thing is, check the agency's requirements, what they require. And at ECE, the documents that we require, for students that are completed, students that have already graduated, we're going to want to see their diploma and their examination results. Certainly aware, not all programs are complete. Most students are going to apply before they've finished, before they receive that, before they've taken the final exam. For those students, we're going to look for those yearly school issued grade reports. We don't necessarily say the last three. Usually we're going to look for everything after the CITO test. I think usually about grade 7. And we'll kind of look through those and decide which ones sort of meet education that we think is kind of similar, for US high school, what we'd consider grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. And this is maybe the most important thing. So much of my job is making sure that we get the right kind of documents. And again, this is going to differ from school to school, university to university, agency to agency. The easiest way to get documents is for those documents to be emailed to us by a verifiable contact. And I put that in bold and I put that in underline. Here at ECE, we deal with a lot of dishonest people. Academic fraud is a huge thing that we are constantly fighting. And what we see all the time are either faked emails, spoofed emails, or emails coming from someone where we don't know who they are. And this is a really difficult thing. And I know, speaking to this audience of school counselors, at your school, everyone knows you're the school counselor. Everyone knows that you, John Smith, are the school counselor. We don't know that. If your name and your email address isn't on the school website, we don't know who you are. And believe it or not, we get documents all the time that are emailed that we've found are fake documents. Someone has an email address at the school. Someone has a school email address, a student, a friend of your student. They can change their email signature to say, hey, Timothy Kell, hey, I'm the school counselor. Anybody can change their email signature to say anything. So one thing that we always check very carefully is to make sure that we can confirm, if you're sending us documents from your personal email account, we're going to make sure that we can confirm you're the school counselor. If we can't confirm that, we probably aren't going to accept those documents. And again, it's just because we see enough fraud, documents coming from people that we can't trust or people that we've found out certainly we're not the school counselor. Other than email, we do accept paper documents in a sealed and stamped school envelope. And we even accept, sometimes students are already in the United States, or sometimes they no longer have contact with their school. And we will accept, the real paper documents already in the student's possession. And of course, we give those back to the students when we're done with them. One thing we absolutely don't accept, anything emailed to us by the student or any type of photocopies. We just can't verify those documents. We can't confirm that information hasn't been changed. English language translations, we ask students to provide translations of their documents. We absolutely need the documents in the Dutch language. We would never review only translations. We use translations sort of as help. And really at ECE, my job is to be able to read the documents in the Dutch language. So I don't really even look at the translations, but my typist, the person that types up the reports for me, doesn't necessarily have those language skills. And it's sort of my job. If my assistant, my typist, is going to type a list of courses, they'll type from the translation. We want translations to be complete, literal. Don't translate grades, don't interpret things. That's sort of our job, is to look at all of that. We don't require professional translations. Again, any translation that we get, I'm going to check that very carefully and make sure that everything matches and that everything's correct. Okay. Last thing I'm going to talk about is just a little bit about how ECE, how we at ECE, how we evaluate Dutch secondary or pre-university education. And I'll start off with havo. And with this, I'm gonna put some evaluation reports up here on the screen in just a second, and you'll be able to see kind of what some of those evaluation reports look like. So really what happens is this diploma ends up on my desk. I look at it and I prepare a report that looks like this. And this is called our general with grade average. It kind of says that this student in 2022 earned, and I won't try to pronounce things in Dutch because I won't do a very good job, but they received a havo diploma. ECE, we think havo is equivalent to a high school diploma. Why? Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's about 12 years of education, and you can get into fights, whether you're going to count, kindergarten in the United States, what's compulsory, what's not compulsory. We think it's sort of a similar number of years. It's a benchmark credential that allows access to at least, certainly not all Dutch universities, but at least the HBO, the University of Applied Sciences. We think it sort of represents high school diploma. And as Pauline said, I think most U.S. schools will admit Dutch students with only a havo. Some of the more selective U.S. schools may look for VWO, which I'm going to come to in a second, but that would probably be the exception, not the rule. Okay, VWO, sort of that more academic, that better option. Students that want to go on to the VO, the WO, the academic universities. Extra year of study, and I'm telling you guys all things that of course you already know. Students can do a 3-year degree at the academic universities instead of a 4-year degree at the applied sciences. So even in the Dutch system, you're kind of already seeing that at least some of the universities are saying, hey, with VWO, you can do 3 years of university instead of 4 years. And we really kind of take a cue from that. So at ECE, and I should mention that this is what we call our course by course report. So you can see here, we have like a list of, all the different courses that the student, took as part of their exams. At ECE, when we look at VWO, we look at that as being a high school diploma and 1 year of university study. Or put another way, we think that VWO is kind of like the first year or the freshman year of a US bachelor's degree. And so you can see for this student that did VWO, we recommend about 32, about a year, in the United States, 30 credits is about 1 year of study. We recommend about 1 year of study for those courses done in the VWO program. And again, this is our recommendation. I keep going back to it. Everything in the US is decentralized. Schools may accept this recommendation. They may not accept this recommendation. They may give students selective exemption. Hey, we'll exempt you from economics. We'll exempt you from physics. They may not. Again, everything is decentralized. But remember, that's job security. MBO. Ooh, okay. I hate talking about this one because I know that this one is always maybe the most controversial thing and maybe the most upset Dutch students that I talk with. Sort of how we look at sort of the secondary level vocational education. And again, in a second here, I'm going to show you a course by course report type. I've done this job long enough, and I've worked with the EducationUSA office long enough to know that sort of what the Netherlands wants US schools to do with this is very different than what we actually do. I think a lot of people in the Netherlands say this is like a US associate's degree, or it's kind of like a 2-year US university degree. But we really disagree with that. When we evaluate these programs, these MBO programs, we recommend only a high school diploma. We don't recommend any kind of university credit. So you can see here when we list courses, we say that these are high school level courses. A couple of reasons for that. Probably 2 primary reasons. First, just structurally in the Dutch system, MBO programs are part of secondary education. They're legally defined as secondary education. They're not part of higher education in the Netherlands. So we're very hesitant to look at something that's secondary in one country and call it university in another. And I know that VWO is kind of an exception to that. But even there, some universities allow 3-year degrees instead of 4-year degrees. So in some sense, it's kind of, there's some exemption built in. The second reason that we don't recommend university credit for MBO is that the Dutch universities themselves don't consider it to be university level. Or put in other words, if you have MBO and try to get to university in the Netherlands, you may or may not be admitted. And certainly, whether it's the applied sciences or the academic research universities, students with an MBO aren't going to be given any kind of advanced standing. So if you guys have questions on that or want to debate that, I'm happy to talk more. But I know just from having done this job for a little while that it's kind of a controversial thing. Last thing I'll talk about, just sort of some of our grade recommendations. I know Pauline showed a scale that's similar to this. It's maybe a little bit more strict in that they require an 8, a minimum of 8 for the U.S. letter grade of A. And I think those recommendations came from the NCAA, like the college sporting regulatory body. And I think EC actually wrote those guidelines. We were contracted by the NCAA to write those guidelines about 15 years ago. And EC, we've actually changed some of our grading. We've been a little bit, I don't know what you want to say, more forgiving, or we've sort of lowered some of our requirements to get some of the number of grades. We know that some of those grades, 9, 10, just aren't ever used, rarely awarded in the Netherlands. So some of our recommendations are just a little bit different. And I think our recommendations today actually match the recommendation from US Fulbright for Dutch students. And I think that's all of my slides. Thank you.